Gold and silver prices are rigged to defend the US dollar. Global debt and the dollar supply have never been larger, so the financial fraud is the largest in history. The world was defrauded of sound money.
Please join us for our next live stream Sunday, March 14th at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll go over current events, past guests, and of course, gold and silver news. Once again, our next live stream will be Sunday, March 14th, 9 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. As always, if you are new to our channel or if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe, hit the bell to be notified on new updates, and give us a thumbs up if you like what we do. Again, we truly do appreciate your support. Our guest today is Stuart Englert, author of Rigged, Exposing the Largest Financial Fraud in History. A veteran investigative reporter and magazine editor by trade, Stuart worked on publications in Indiana, Idaho, and Tennessee before authoring his first book in 2015. And we're delighted to have Stuart here as a first-time guest. It's time to saddle up and silver up for Stuart Englert. Stuart, welcome to SBTV. How are you doing?
I'm real good, Patrick. Thanks so much for the invitation. I look forward to speaking with you today.
We're happy to have you, Stuart, and we're glad that you had some time for us. So, Stuart, from the very beginning, can you share with us a little about your background and your motivations to write your book, Rigged, Exposing the Largest Financial Fraud in History?
Sure, Patrick. You know, I've been a journalist for 30 years, or I was a journalist, I guess. I worked on 3 daily newspapers and 2 national magazines in the country here before I started publishing books about 7 years ago. Early in my career, I was an investigative reporter, and that's kind of how I approached writing of this book. I've long been concerned about the national debt here in the United States. I always wondered how the federal government could continually spend more money than it collects, in revenue. And about 12 to 15 years ago, I ran across the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. I know you're personally familiar with GATA, but for your viewers, for your audience, I'd like to say that GATA was formed in 1999 to expose market manipulation and suppression of gold and silver prices. And since I edit and publish books, I thought precious metals manipulation would be a worthwhile topic. So about 2 years ago, I asked GATA's Secretary Treasurer, Chris Powell, if he'd like to write the book. And I told him I would publish it on his behalf. He said he was busy at the time, maintaining their website and getting out the daily dispatches and everything. So in the fall of 2019, I had some time. And I dove into GATA's online archives and just read them for about 3 months, I guess. And I pored over these documents, and I decided that I needed to write this book because the mainstream media doesn't cover this topic, as you know. I wrote Rigged as a primer, if you will, an introduction to the subject. I tried to convey the complex issue in language that everyone could understand. And I tried to avoid the technical jargon as much as possible, or at least explain it. So I believe everyone should know how our currency is devalued and the precious metals are manipulated. And I think our financial futures depend on it.
Yeah, Chris, he's always a busy guy, both Chris and Bill. So glad that you took the hand off and you took the ball and ran with it and came out with that book. But for clarity, what is this financial fraud specifically, and how is it perpetuated?
Well, the fraud encompasses really the entire monetary and financial system across the globe. It involves manipulation of financial markets and suppression of gold and silver prices, which began with the removal of sound money from the financial system over the last 2 centuries. First, they demonetized silver, and then they demonetized gold. And then we ended up with complete fiat currencies. When the central banks and governments removed gold and silver backing from their currency, they defrauded the entire world, I think, of sound money. And the fraud is perpetuated by manipulating the currencies the interest rates, and the bond prices, and suppressing precious metal prices. And it appears the US dollar and other fiat currencies are, what they're trying to do is make it appear that the fiat currencies are as good as silver and gold. And I've concluded in the book that they're not.
Yeah, totally agree there. Um, but why do you call this the largest financial fraud in history? I mean, how does it compare to Enron or even Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme?
Good question. And I made that comparison early in my introduction in the book. Well, the way I see it, the Enron scandal and the Bernie Madoff scandal both involved billions of dollars in financial malfeasance. Prosecutors in the Madoff case attributed his Ponzi to a $65 billion, okay, is what they estimated his Ponzi scheme at. And Madoff was ordered to pay restitution of $170 billion. How I see it, the biggest financial fraud in history involves hundreds of trillions of dollars. And if you include all of the financial derivatives, it goes into the quadrillions. It's essentially all the money in the world, right? All the fiat currencies and all these derivatives. This includes all currencies and all the debt that is as linked to the US dollar in international trade and finance. Here's how I explained it in the book. I'll read an excerpt from the book. Gold and silver prices are rigged to defend the US dollar. Since the dollar is the dominant currency in international trade, every foreign currency exchanged for dollars is rigged, along with the entire financial system. Global debt and the dollar supply have never been larger, so the financial fraud is the largest in history. The world was defrauded of sound money.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to word it there. In part of this though, the manipulation is also to keep the dollar a bit strong. But can we say that if the gold price was allowed to trade without the manipulation, that the dollar would be substantially weaker today and possibly lose or have even lost its reserve currency status?
Yes. The implications that we're seeing is that we're going to see further debasement of the dollar and other currencies, as well as monetary and price inflation, meaning that the currencies become worthless and consumer good prices will continue to rise. I concluded in the book, and history has proven, that the fraud cannot continue forever. All fiat currencies eventually die and go the way of the dodo and the dinosaur. And that's the direction the dollar is headed.
Is the U.S. government the chief manipulator of the gold price?
Well, yes, the government is involved. And I don't think the manipulation could occur without the government allowing it. But let me say that, many people accuse J.P. Morgan and the other bullion banks as the primary precious metal manipulators. And no doubt they're guilty as charged. They've admitted to manipulating markets, and they've been fined billions of dollars for these crimes. But we mustn't overlook the central banks, the Bank for International Settlements, and the U.S. Treasury Department's Exchange Stabilization Fund, which has legal authority to intervene in financial markets. And that includes the gold market. And all this is designed to defend the dollar, as you said before. But, the big point that I'd like to make is that the manipulators couldn't get by with their malfeasance without the consent of the politicians and the government regulators. They are complicit in perpetuating the scheme because, they don't stop it. Most politicians avoid the topic altogether. And while the Department of Justice and the CFTC issue fines and penalties periodically, the bad actors keep acting badly. No one, at least no major player, is sent to jail, and so it's business as usual. It seems to me.
Yeah, there are some people who believe that the banks may simply be acting on behalf of the governments and treasuries.
That's what Chris Powell concludes, and I think he's spot on, and I allude that to that in the book as well.
Let's say other countries. Do you think there are other countries who are involved in this as well?
Yes, absolutely. Every central bank that's a member of the Bank for International Settlements, which is known as the BIS in Basel, Switzerland, and it's known as the central bank of central banks. They are either directly or indirectly involved in this. The BIS swaps and leases gold and intervenes in foreign exchange markets on behalf of its 63 member banks and monetary authorities. And documents show, and some of them are included in the book, that Western central banks are directly involved. That includes the German Bundesbank and the Bank of England, to name a few. We also know that countries that don't accept the US dollar in international trade often suffer the consequences of not participating in this scheme.
Well, sir, do you think there's a greater desire today from the international community to want to move away from the current dollar-based monetary system?
Yeah, absolutely. The Chinese and Russians have already been talking about it. They advocated it back in 2009, I think, that we find a new global monetary standard because they're tired of it. And I'd like to say, I think this answers a question you had earlier. Without gold price manipulation, the dollar would be substantially weaker and likely would lose its world reserve currency status unless the United States would come forward and be the first nation to back its currency with gold. I don't see that happening. Then, ultimately it would be revealed whether the United States has the 8,300 tons of gold that it claims to have.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that question. I mean, let's say, all the powers that be, the great nations, they get around on the round table and put their gold on the table and, everybody sees who has what. Do you think the U.S. actually has that 8,000 plus metric tons?
I have no idea. And because we don't have good independent audits, it's hard to say. Our last Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, tweeted one time that the gold was safe, but I don't know. He didn't say whether it was all there or not, or whether it was all accounted for. So I think that was back in 2017 during the great eclipse that we had here in the United States.
Stuart, if we were back in the 90s, no one would believe that the gold price would be more than, let's say, $1,000. But we've seen gold prices surge to over $2,000 just last year. To play a little bit of devil's advocate here, how would you explain market rigging when gold prices are rising in a bull market?
Sure, that's a great question, Patrick. And you're right, gold prices have risen from $250 back in 2000 to we've had over $2,000 gold last year. I think it's around 1,700 and something today, which is a substantial increase. However, what we must take into account is that gold prices have not kept pace with the growth of the money supply, which is being expanded in a futile attempt to extinguish the burgeoning global debt of $280 trillion. Actually, I see suppression of gold as an organized retreat by the manipulators. They must periodically allow the price to rise, or all these inflated economic booms and bubbles would pop, and the whole powder keg would blow up. So the gold price is allowed to rise. It's used kind of like a pressure release valve to keep the financial system from exploding in a single event. But it does appear to me that it's an organized retreat where they let it go up for a while, then they bring it back, and it keeps eventually going up. But they're definitely holding it down. They're trying to hold it under the water so it doesn't explode out of the water.
Stuart, why should people buy gold now if its price is manipulated? Aren't they sort of setting themselves up for more heartbreak when nominal prices are smashed down periodically?
Yeah, another good question. I've witnessed the repeated monkey hammering of the precious metal prices over the last 15 years. We all have. Yet gold and silver prices have gradually risen despite the manipulation. But I view precious metals as insurance rather than an investment. At least the physical metals. And if people are concerned about the fragility and longevity of the existing financial system, and I think they should be, they might consider owning some insurance, despite the periodic price smashes.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I can honestly say that I've never bought an ounce of gold or silver as an investment. It's always been as an insurance. Would you say that you're 100% certain that the current dollar-based monetary system is eventually going to fail? How you mentioned all fiat eventually goes to zero, and the only question is when.
Yeah, no, nobody knows that. I wish I had a crystal ball and could tell you. But my reading of history tells me that the biggest problem with fiat currencies is that they're all finite. They have a limited shelf life. They expire after a while. The US dollar has had a great 50-year run as a fiat global reserve currency. But I know eventually all good things come to an end. And as a fiat currency, I think the dollar's days are dwindling. More and more people are realizing, awakening, if you will, that something is diseased and wrong with the current financial system. And a growing number are exchanging their fiat currencies for precious metals. When young people or nations, I should say, when enough people or nations lose confidence in the system, a new one will arise. And hopefully the new one will be based on sound money and free markets, which is something we don't have right now.
A lot of people think that new one will be these central bank digital currencies. What's your feeling or your opinion on those?
Well, there's a lot of talk about that. And we hear our Treasury Secretary and our Federal Reserve Chairman talking about these things. And I think that's the direction they want to take it. If they're going to back it up with sound money, with gold and silver again, I can't say I'd oppose it. But I think there has to be some transparency in the system. And that's what we don't have right now. It's the whole thing is hidden behind a curtain, and the majority of the people don't know how the system operates and how corrupt it is.
Okay, so our current system, the fiat-based monetary system, what do you think is the greatest problem with this fiat-based monetary system? Is it perhaps not being backed by anything? Is it perhaps politicians abusing it? What do you think is the greatest problem with it?
Well, there's so many. There's so many. It's hard to name just one. It's all of the above. It's all the things that we've been talking about. It's the government going off of sound money. The government allowing the manipulation and the rigging of the system to continue. It's everything that I've mentioned so far. You can't boil it down to just one thing, but I think it's going to require all of us to awaken to the rigged system, to overthrow the rigged system.
Stuart, by trade, you're an investigative journalist. What was your feeling, your take when you first started taking that deep dive and digging up all this evidence from GATA that they provided? What was going on through your mind at the time from everything that you have covered before through your journalism career?
Sure. Well, I'm a skeptic by nature, Patrick. I don't believe anything that anybody tells me, really. I always have to investigate it myself. And I've got to prove it time and again. One document won't do it, and two documents won't do it. I have to see the whole picture and get down to the grassroots of it. And that's what I did with this book. When I poured into GATA's archives, I mean, I took a deep dive. I read hours and hours and hours of documents and tried to extract, some of the what I considered the most pertinent issues that would help explain the manipulation scheme. And what I came away with is that anybody that doesn't believe the precious metal markets are manipulated, they need to look at the evidence. That's what I did, and I concluded that the financial markets are rigged, the currency's rigged, and our precious metals prices are suppressed.
Yeah. Why do you think mainstream media just does not take the role, not necessarily take the role, but why do you think mainstream media does not let people know these things and what's going on?
Well, there's a number of reasons, and I address that in the book as well. First of all, it's a complex issue. And the media likes simple things, black and white, good and bad, and get to the point. Well, to explain the manipulation, it's a complex subject about how it works. That's one of the reasons. But the other reasons is they're complicit with the rigging, as far as I'm concerned. They're covering for the governments and the existing establishment, the Wall Street banks. They don't want to undermine the existing system and the US dollar because it has economic and national security implications.
Through your research, I mean, of course, you've come across the London gold pool, and that ultimately failed because a lot of people think when the public started taking delivery, that was more or less the downfall. And we kind of see that today with the markets, where they simply do not want people to take delivery. And this is the same situation back with the London gold pool. So in a sense, do we have the London gold pool 2.0 now today?
Yes, and here's the great thing. You've heard that old saying, he who owns the gold makes the rules.
Yeah.
Well, what if the people start taking ownership of the gold and silver, notably the silver? Then they can control it. Then they can have the shots. Then the Wall Street banks and the government can't do it anymore. That's, to me, the empowering part of people buying physical metals, is to take the monetary power back.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's say these other countries, as we mentioned, they do want to get away from the dollar. But let's say China does come out with some type of a gold-backed one, or Europe does really fully implement their rival to the SWIFT system called Instex, where money can then be transferred freely without passing through the U.S. system. How, I don't want to use dangerous because there are people who actually do want this, but how significant would this be a challenge to the U.S. dollar?
Oh, absolutely it would. Sure it would. We have this huge import or trade imbalance with China. And if they're going to change the global monetary system, I mean, where are we going to come up with the gold to ship to them? Are we going to get rid of the last? Oh yeah, there are huge implications if any other country would do this. I mean, we saw some indications that my understanding is that Libya's Muammar Gaddafi was talking about, backing Libya's currency with metals. And I think that was one of the reasons he was taken out. Any country that tries to stand up to the US dollar or trade in something else or sell their oil in anything but dollars, they face consequences. And that's why I said earlier that, nations that try to undermine the dollar, they face consequences, and there's national security issues here. And that's another reason that I don't think the government and the politicians address this issue. They avoid it. They don't want to wake up any sleeping giants,
Yeah.
including American people or people around the world.
Yeah. But that's a strange thing, Stuart, because you mentioned how the government doesn't want other countries to undermine the dollar, but yet it's our own government and our own politicians who are undermining our own dollar.
You're absolutely right. That's the catch-22. They're doing exactly what they don't want other nations to do. And that's because they won't have the ultimate control. And when and if we segue to a new monetary and financial system, I guess. There's another document that I found when I was doing the research for the book, and GATA actually has included it in its archives. And it was a declassified CIA document that says the International Monetary Fund's strategic drawing rights, you know them as SDRs, were created by central banks in 1969 to decrease gold demand, physical gold demand, and act as a paper substitute for the physical gold. The title of that 1970 document is Special Drawing Rights, Paper Gold in Action. So the title itself is very telling. They set up this paper system to supplant or replace the physical gold.
Yeah, you know what? What's pretty eerie about what you just said is you mentioned it came out in 1969. The year before, 1968, was when the London gold pool failed.
Yes, yes. And those things just coincide. And if you start stacking this up chronologically, you can see that the central banks play a very long game. And that's why, average investors have a tough time holding the metals. You see what I'm saying? Because the banks they play a very, very long game. And it's often beyond the lives of individuals, the type of long game they play.
Okay. In your opinion, what should we be doing? What should, let's say, the average Joe, what should he be doing, the average man on the street?
Well, we can do things. We certainly can. The first thing we can do is educate ourselves and spread the word about manipulation. People can talk to their family and friends about it, even if they run the risk of being called a kook or a conspiracy theory. And I'm going to use a prompt for my next thing.
Sure.
I'd like to say that they can join the silverbacks over there at subreddit Wall Street Silver, I think is what it is. Yeah. And like Silver Bullion TV, they contribute to the billboard campaign that Wall Street Silver's got going. I guess you're familiar with that. They're trying to get out the word about the silver manipulation. And I think that's a great thing. They can also buy my book and pass it on to the naysayers and the people that say that it's a myth or a conspiracy theory. Or, they can get a bumper sticker to put on their car, hashtag silver squeeze. There's lots of little things that we can do. Too many people remain clueless about the depth of fraud in the financial system. And it affects us all every day. Some people are afraid to explore or learn about the truth about it because it rattles their confidence in the system and the institutions they so desperately want to trust and believe in. But avoidance and denial are not a wise approach to the future or to protect one's financial interests. So I think we've got to educate ourselves and spread the word.
And Stuart, what response do you hope readers of your book will have when they're on that last page, read it, and close the book?
Well, I wrote the book to provide people with evidence of market manipulation and a better understanding of this rigged financial system, so they could make wise financial decisions based on the fact that the existing one is fraught with flaws and fraud. I believe education and awareness is the first step one must take to protect their own financial assets. And I hope this book inspires them to do that.
Stuart Englert, before we wrap up, can you let our viewers know more about your work and where they can buy your book, Rigged, Exposing the Largest Financial Fraud in History?
Sure, Patrick. Well, Rigged is available from Amazon and other online retailers in paperback and ebook on Amazon. I also offer autographed copies for readers here in the United States if they want to email me at srenglert@comcast.net. And by the way, 10% of the royalties go to GATA, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. I've also written an allegorical novel trilogy titled Paradox that explores, blind headed groupthink and the quest for freedom and some of the monetary issues that we've been talking about today. I'm also working on a financial memoir that I hope people will get a chance to read in the future.
All right, Stuart, we appreciate the time you've given us, and we hope we can do this again real soon.
Thanks so much, Patrick. I appreciate the invite, and thanks for having me on Silver Bullion TV.
That was Stuart Englert, author of Rigged, exposing the largest financial fraud in history, sharing with us his research regarding the rigging of the gold market. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the SBTV channel to be updated on new content. And also check out the SBTV podcast on iTunes and Spotify.